All right, let's jump right in. Today we're tackling an absolutely epic story, one that stretches across continents and thousands of years. We're talking about the incredible journey of the Turkic peoples, from nomads on the open plains to the architects of some of history's mightiest empires.
Just picture it for a second. That first light hitting a sea of grass that goes on forever. This is where our story kicks off. Not in a walled city, not in a grand palace, but out in the open, in a world that never, ever stood still.
You see, to really understand the empires, you have to understand the place that forged these people. And the steppe, while it wasn't just a location, it was a teacher. It was a whole way of life.
This right here is the key to their entire worldview. For the early Turks, land wasn't something you owned. It was something you moved through. To stop, to settle down, that was like giving up. Movement was life itself.
And this wasn't some abstract philosophy, It was their everyday reality. Living in felt tents you could pack up and move in an hour. The smell of smoke from the campfire always in the air. And that one sound that defined everything, the sound of horses, always ready to go. Home wasn't a place. It was the journey.
I love this quote because it perfectly captures how they survived out there. Life on the steppe was all about speed and distance. A kid learned to ride a horse practically before they could walk. The horse wasn't just an animal, it was a part of you. It gave you wings. And the bow, that wasn't just a weapon, it was your arm reaching out across the plain.
Okay, so they were incredible warriors. But being a great fighter isn't enough to build an empire that lasts. Their strength actually came from two different sources, these two massive pillars, the skill of the warrior and the strength of their laws. Let's see how they work together.
This created this incredible balance, right? On one side, you have the raw power of the individual, the speed, the horse, the bow. But on the other side, you have the thing that organizes all that power, the state, built on the idea of justice, order, and a ruler who is also bound by the law.
And the absolute core of that social structure was a concept called Turk. Now, this wasn't some dusty law book written by a king. It was more like an unwritten constitution, an ancient promise that everyone lived by. It was the operating system for their entire civilization.
And here's what made Turks so powerful. First, justice was everything. Second, your word was your bond, an oath of honor. And maybe the most important part, nobody, and I mean nobody, was above the law. The leader, the Khan, stood just as accountable as a simple shepherd. A ruler had a divine right to rule, sure, but if he became a tyrant, that right was gone. Think about that. Accountability was built right into the system from the very beginning.
So you've got this potent mix of military skill and a rock-solid social code. And with that kind of foundation, something started to shift. Their gaze, their ambition, started to look past the horizon of the steppe.
Eventually, the endless plains just didn't seem so endless anymore. They weren't just looking for new grazing lands, they started searching for a new purpose. So what happens? What do you do when your whole world starts to feel too small for your ideas?
Their answer was, it was breathtaking. A whole new ideology started to form. The belief that their system of justice, their Turk, shouldn't just be for them. They believed it was a universal good that should be spread across the entire world from east to west, sunrise to sunset.
This whole idea was called Cihan Hakimiyeti, or world sovereignty. And it's really important to get this right. This wasn't about destruction or just grabbing land. It was a mission, a philosophy of governance, to bring their idea of order and justice to everyone.
So that's the grand vision. But how do you actually make something like that happen? Well, it became the engine that drove a whole series of incredible empires, each one leaving a huge mark on world history.
And you can literally trace this legacy through time. You have the Huns, who terrified Rome, then the Turks, who were the first to actually write the name Turk into the history books. The Uyghurs brought in bureaucracy and the power of the written word. The Seljuks pushed into Anatolia. And finally, the Ottomans, who took this whole model and perfected it, growing from a tiny state into a true world power.
Now, ruling a massive empire filled with different religions, different languages, different cultures, that is unbelievably hard. So what was their secret? How did these empires manage to last for centuries?
The secret, surprisingly, was a very practical kind of tolerance. For the most part, they didn't try to force people to convert. They let communities keep their own languages, their own cultures, their own identities. They weren't trying to make everybody the same.
So if you're not forcing everyone to be the same, what's the glue that holds it all together? It all comes back to that one single principle they learned on the steppe, the promise of a fair,
predictable system of justice for everyone under their rule.
And that right there brings our whole story full circle, because the greatest achievements of these massive empires, their armies, their art, their grand cities, all of it had its DNA, its origin story in the lessons learned out on those harsh open plains.
You see, the toolkit you need to build a world-spanning empire, it wasn't something they learned in a fancy school or a royal court.
It wasn't fundamentally about piling up gold or building extravagant monuments. That wasn't the core of it.
They learned everything they needed to know right there, on the windswept steppe, where the rules were clear and survival was the only grade that mattered.
Everything they became was forged in that crucible, the incredible discipline that comes from a life on horseback, a deep, instinctual understanding of justice from Turks, the patience you learn when you live by the seasons. All of it led to this core idea. You don't just conquer lands, you have to win the hearts of the people who live there.
And maybe that's the whole story, right there, in one sentence. For the Turks, an empire wasn't a patch of color on a map. An empire was what happened when you successfully brought order and justice to a corner of the world. Thanks so much for joining me on this one.